My primary aim in this video essay is to lay out the logical proof of the validity of universal morality. The proof will vindicate universal morality as the only consistent system of ethics human beings can practice, while at the same time illuminating common false moral propositions. A thorough exploration of epistemology would probably be the prudent thing to do before asking anyone to swallow my conclusions regarding universal principles. However, given that this is a video essay and not a dissertation, I prefer to not have the viewers fall asleep before I get to the start of the essay. I'm going to make a little leap of faith and rely on common sense to get me to the starting line by asserting without qualification that knowledge comes to us via two primary avenues, that is, empirically through the senses, and from that which we can deduce rationally using logic. However, I'm an empiricist first, and in acquiescence to the expression seeing is believing, I don't expect everyone to just buy the conclusion, so to speak, because it seems logically sound. For most people, I would assume that in order to experience any kind of epiphany that would potentially shake the foundations of everything they've been told, something drastic would have to play out right before their eyes. Empirical evidence will always trump logic as the ultimate arbiter of reality. It's a tragic thing that man's faith in logic has not quite grown strong enough to override his need for social acceptance. Intuition, which we call that gut feeling, I would imagine evolved for the purpose of efficiently navigating certain social situations to ensure the safest course of action. My hunch is that it also evolved with a bias towards social norms. An over-reliance on it can potentially block someone from accepting something that is logically true but counterintuitive. This phenomenon is easily demonstrated in the realm of physics when considering how objects of different masses fall at the same rate. It's something that usually has to be seen to be believed. Fortunately for the theory, one need only to look around using the lenses cast for you in this video to see everything you need to see in order to give the theory the intuitive backing it deserves. Since humanity has been seeped in false morality for so long, I have little faith that intuition alone can bring one to the realization that true morality is objective. Because of this, the prognosis is grim for humanity's ability to change en masse from the application of abstract logic alone. For me, this logical exercise has been exhilarating. I've experienced it as a sort of vindication. As a result, the clouds have parted, and I see light at the end of the tunnel. But for many people, it will be a horror and rejected right off the bat. However, don't let that group be confused with the other group, which consists of those who indulge in the healthy dose of skepticism that has been so critical for uncovering truth throughout the ages. I implore you who watch this video to actively put this theory to the test. Probe at it. Look for holes and share your findings with me. If my logic has failed, show me where and how. If there is evidence to contradict an assertion or premise in this video, point me to where I can find it. That being said, I am fully aware of potential gray areas that are introduced whenever concepts are used that can have more than one meaning. Also, many times when considering ethics, someone will succeed in conjuring up what we call a lifeboat scenario that seems to lay the whole theory to waste. Believe me, I've heard them all, and it would be beyond the scope and time limit of this video to indulge every single one in a billion situation that could occur involving potential ethical decisions. Most likely the situation you're thinking of has been hashed out a million times on the internet, making it easy to get an answer from any number of resources online. So before you write off the whole thing with your gotcha scenario, do your due diligence and think about it for a little bit before coming to a conclusion. One more thing. There were many places in the video where I wanted to insert further explanation for this definition or that definition, or this premise or that premise. But I realize that I can get the point across even if I omit that kind of detail. Perhaps a follow-up video will be called for in order to address certain areas of inquiry more in detail. But for now, I'm just happy to get through the proof and plant the seeds of universal morality in your mind, and hopefully, in time, the seeds will grow and universal morality will become just as much a reality to you as it is to me. About 2 years ago, I read a book called Universally Preferable Behavior by Stefan Molyneux. I read it again immediately after finishing it, and then 1 year later I read it again. It wasn't until I rolled the concept around in my head over and over nonstop for quite a few days in a row that it finally sunk in. It was just one of those moments when everything clicks. Everything seemed to line up quite clearly. I grabbed my phone and immediately started dictating the proof in my own words so I wouldn't forget it. I was very excited because the proof seemed so simple, and I thought that I should easily be able to communicate it to anybody. That's what I'm doing here, and hopefully I can do justice to what I believe to be one of the most game-changing books in the history of philosophy, and a great discovery on the part of the author. I hope that this simple rehashing, in my own words, of the core proof put forth in the book will help other people who don't have the time for a full philosophical exploration of the topic to accept the validity of universal morality. I wonder what this man is thinking. The photograph seems to perfectly capture a sentiment experienced by many combat vets at some point in their deployment that what they're currently doing serves no good purpose. He looks emotionally crushed. But this is all just guesswork based on a photograph. What about this guy? It looks like he wants answers. Yes, those eyes are pleading for an answer. Pretty soon that emotion of shock and disbelief will turn to seething anger. Is there one person on the planet that would dare tell him not to feel angry? What are you going to do? Explain to him about collateral damage and pat him on the back for taking one for the team? Nope. But unlike most people, I have an answer for him. The cause of this scene can be traced not to a system or some kind of abstract concept, but to real people. Direct your anger at the people who want to wish away morality because it's inconvenient to them. The people who are uncomfortable with the truth and objective reality. The moral relativists, the multiculturalists, and the nihilists. Without consistent principles, the human being is a flapping, floundering fish out of water, a loose cannon, a wrecking ball of epic proportions. And this man was unfortunately on the receiving end of the ill effects of such a state of reality and the people who promote it. This video exposes the culprit and provides the solution. It is the antidote to an insane world. There is human nature. It is coded into our genes and acts as a framework for interpreting, processing, and reacting to environmental stimulus. The genetic framework is malleable, though, not on an individual level, but on a species level. What our genes code for changes with each generation. Why is this? Well, because human beings select which genes get to reproduce themselves. It's called mating. And each time period in history favors different genetic sets. Women didn't breed with Genghis Khan because he loved computers, and in turn, Mark Zuckerberg wasn't selected for his ninja warrior skills. Times change, environments change, human nature changes. But one thing has stayed pretty much consistent since the descent of anatomically modern man over 200,000 years ago. That is, his basic primal needs. Those needs, so fundamental to survival and flourishing of the species, were charted out by Abraham Maslow and represented in this well-known graphic that nearly everyone with a high school diploma has seen. Now, I'm not here to argue the validity or accuracy of Maslow's hierarchy, but I do think it is a good point of reference when analyzing human behavior, for there surely are reasons behind why we act one way or another, and I'm just using Maslow's hierarchy as a placeholder to represent those primal drives. Now that person on the left is me. Don't let my handsomeness distract you from the logic I'm putting forth in this video. You see, I want to attain all of these milestones in life. One thing is for sure, and that is if I don't at least attain up through the first 3 rungs of the pyramid, my chances of reproducing will drastically decrease. And reproducing is one of life's big motivators. Yeah, I know some people don't want to have children, but how many people don't have a sex drive? Ah, and there is my child. I'm very excited. I want my child to have a fulfilling life. This of course starts with making sure his or her basic needs are met. With some good parenting, I should be able to have my child fit in socially and internalize local cultural norms. A commitment to ensuring that my child has the skills and knowledge to experience success in various endeavors of his or her young life will ensure the development of self-confidence and self-esteem. And what father would not want their child to reach the top? A victory for the child is a victory for the parent. Yes, we want our kids to have all their needs met, which is why we give them useful tools to do so. And those tools are principles. They are the golden nuggets of knowledge passed down throughout history and forged the hard way through trial and error, where failure oftentimes meant death. And here is where I will present to you my working definition of principles. Principles are useful behavioral practices that we follow at all times in order to efficiently navigate through a complex social environment. They are useful because they help us attain our needs. We follow them at all times because having any other directive concerning behavioral principles, like sometimes or only if you feel like it, would completely defeat the purpose of having principles in the first place. They are efficient because they don't require the acting agent to sit and ponder what would be the best course of action. Doing a cost-benefit analysis for every decision one makes in applicable situations regarding these principles would require the average human lifespan to be, 4 times as long as it is now. Simply put, there is no time for that. We need principles. We can thank the producing class throughout history for forging these principles for us. A king or a pharaoh doesn't have to negotiate with anyone. They don't even have to have any kind of patience. In fact, as a ruler, you can get by with having absolutely no virtues at all. It doesn't matter. But the marketplace, the world of the producers, demands cooperation. It demands negotiation. It demands skill development. It demands grit. When you can't rely on force to get what you want, then you have to adopt all these other things to sustain yourself and your family. Today we teach our children things like don't hit, tell the truth, be nice, try your best, cooperate. They are behavioral imperatives that serve to ensure that our children will have the best chance possible in the environment we currently live in to attain the needs at the top of the pyramid. Suppose for a moment that you had just given your child options instead of principles. How useful would that be for them? In that case, they would just rely on feelings alone to guide them through this social complex environment, which for them often takes the shape of a classroom. Sure, you as their guardian would ensure that they were safe at home and felt secure, but would they even make it past the first 2 milestones in Maslow's hierarchy? How long would it take for them to figure out that maybe sharing is a good idea, or to not just grab something when you want it, or not to bite someone who's bothering you? My guess is, if they do figure it out, it'll be too late. They will have already been kicked out of preschool, and the chances of them getting above the second rung in the hierarchy of needs would most likely be wiped out. You would most certainly be labeled a bad parent. As children grow bigger, their world grows bigger as well. Ethical principles become more relevant to their lives. As young adults begin to ponder big world problems, the black and white moral world of their childhood begins to get hazy. Questions start to get asked, and apparent ethical gray areas begin to bubble to the surface. At some point, an anchor is thrown down and morality is declared. This takes the form of ethical principles and often comes down through religious institutions. Ethics deals with that behavior which is both binding and enforceable. A typical moral proclamation would be something like, don't murder, don't rape, and don't steal. Here is my working definition of morality. Morality is composed of those behavioral imperatives in the realm of ethics that are binding on all human beings at all times. Let's now examine 3 moral propositions and see if they hold up to logical consistency. They are, don't murder, don't rape, and don't steal. Must murder, must rape, and must steal. And sometimes murder, sometimes rape, and sometimes steal. Now remember that moral propositions are meant to be universalized. They apply to all people at all times. This, of course, is implied in the very definition of morality. A moral proposition is valid only if it can be applied to all human beings at all times without logical contradiction. Let's examine the first moral proposition for logical consistency. Under this moral proposition, can everybody who holds this moral code be moral at the same time? Of course. It doesn't matter what the number is. All people can simultaneously not murder, not rape, and not steal from each other. This moral theory is logically consistent and therefore valid. What about this one? Can everybody who holds this moral code possibly be moral at all times without contradiction? I'm sure your intuition is telling you no, but let's confirm it anyway with logic just to be sure. If you hold the moral code that everyone must murder, rape, and steal, then that means that you also endorse that everyone must be murdered, raped, and stolen from. You can't have one side of the coin without the other. Under this moral code, you are morally obligated to murder, as well as morally obligated to be murdered. Yes, it's insane, but that is what you're signing up for when you give this idea the thumbs up. For simplicity's sake, let's put person type B in a world of only two people. Both the person on the right and the person on the left believe that it is a moral imperative to both murder and be murdered. So the guy on the left goes to murder the guy on the right. The victim in this scenario not only holds that murder is a moral imperative, but that being murdered is also a moral imperative. If he resists the murder attempt, then he clearly does not hold this particular moral code. He's disingenuous. If he accepts the murder attempt, then it's not murder, it's suicide. For the act of murder requires that one's life be taken against their will. This whole scenario is one giant contradiction. Person B's moral proposition is not valid. And here we come to person C's moral proposition. Surprisingly, putting rape aside, it is this proposition, not person A's, that is the most common in the world. It is certainly the moral disposition of every politician that has ever existed. Organized religion is also champion of this ethical approach, as well as your secular pragmatists, utilitarians, and democracy enthusiasts. In other words, it is the moral position of approximately 99.9% of the people in the world today. That's funny because it's not even a moral proposition. Morality, in its very definition, requires universality. The behavioral imperatives must be applied at all times. But I will ignore this fact for now in order to satiate a typical counterclaim that you hear from many people when considering ethical decisions. And it goes like this. What's wrong with unique moral imperatives for unique situations? Okay, let's alter my definition of morality to accommodate this claim. I'll change the last few words of the definition from at all times to depending on the situation. Let's go to our hypothetical world and see how this plays out. We'll use theft for this one. Let's see. Sometimes steal if the majority demand it. If you endorse this moral code, that means that you are in approval of the moral requirement to steal if the majority demands it, as well as the moral requirement to get stolen from if the majority demand it. Okay, you're good with that? Then let's move on. So person X wants to steal from person Y. He can't because if he's the only one who wants this, then it would be theft, which is immoral. Now let's say that almost half the people in the country want to steal from person Y as well. I'm sorry, person X, but you would still be a thief and your actions would be worthy of condemnation and scorn. But if person X can convince one more person to join the cause, then the action of stealing from person Y becomes not only socially legit, but morally imperative. This hypothetical is bizarre enough as it is. However, being bizarre is not necessarily a logical contradiction. We have to go a little bit farther to see that. Person Y, who also endorses the same moral code, shares the same sentiment as everyone else about person X's intended actions under majority approval. This sets up the inevitable logical contradiction where if person Y resists, he is disingenuous with his morality, and if he voluntarily concedes, it is not theft, and the whole thing just implodes. But can it be good to steal if it serves the greatest good? By this time, I think you can go through the little proof yourself and follow it to its unavoidable conclusion. Just switch out the qualifying requirements and repeat the whole thing. Person X once again wants to steal from person Y, and this time it's in the name of the greatest good, but because person Y also feels like he should be stolen from in the name of the greatest good, then it's not really theft, it's like giving a gift or something. And if person Y resists, then person Y is disingenuous about holding that morality in the first place, and the entire scenario logically self-detonates. Yep, not even the classic utilitarian principles of that which serves the greatest good can escape the requirement that moral imperatives be adopted and applied universally. The logic is ironclad. Of the three propositions, the only moral code that can be valid is person A's. Don't murder, don't rape, and don't steal. There are no qualifications. We can condense these three imperatives into one simple sentence: don't initiate force. Please note that this behavioral imperative does not prohibit self-defense. Naturally, there is nothing innately wrong with the use of force. It is only the initiation of force that is immoral, because, as demonstrated, such a thing cannot be universalized without contradiction. In a universe where 2 plus 2 equals 4, a circle is not a square, and up and down are opposite directions, the only moral code that could logically exist is this one: don't initiate force. And if you want to solve the world's problems, then implanting this ethical principle into the minds of the young is a good place to start. Not everybody has to be moral, though. One can choose to ignore morality, or perhaps even deny its very existence. There are plenty of examples of this. It has been the modus operandi of politics and power since the beginning of civilization. Yes, most all of human history has been a complete and total free-for-all. Most people don't realize that a moral code is not dependent on effect. They never stop to ponder it. The average person is easily drawn into the class of moral proposition that labels any behavior relevant to ethics as moral or immoral, depending on the situation. This is the sometimes category. The idea that morally wrong behavior can magically become moral as long as a certain number of people vote for it, or as long as it is deemed the pragmatic thing to do, is so commonplace in today's society that to point out its irrationality would put one at risk of being labeled an idiot. Diplomacy, pragmatism, politics, statecraft, the public good, these are all fogging mechanisms which allow the rhetorician to hide his or her real motives for doing one thing or another. Since these same rhetoricians often control the media, it is very difficult for people to wade through all the duplicity and manipulation that assaults their senses every time they make an attempt to understand political affairs beyond the scope of their everyday lives. Why should they understand them? They are all too busy being productive. For the most part, people spend their time doing what they should be doing, producing things. No one has time to sit around and research all day long. They've got their jobs to do and kids to raise. As a result, most people endorse immoral propositions because they are victims of propaganda. Propaganda coming down from those who choose to ignore morality out of convenience for their own personal gain. And these types of people completely saturate the upper part of the social hierarchy pyramid, where they can wield the force of the state, control the flow of information, and use that privilege to bend public opinion in their favor. They range from useful idiots to sleazy narcissistic scumbags, and everything in between. The ironic thing is that they hail from the halls of academia, the very place where people do have the time to study history and philosophy. They are supposed to be our intellectuals, our rocks of reason, our champions of morality. But they are none of these things. They are just people responding to incentives like everyone else. There are no moral principles in play. Year after year, they just manipulate people into giving them a whole bunch of money for doing a whole bunch of nothing. And everyone in the country gives them the thumbs up. The thumbs up to theft through taxation, and the thumbs up to people with demonstrably no ethical principles having control over the biggest and most powerful empires the world has ever known. It would be funny if it weren't so tragic. How do you think this is going to play out? We've already seen the results in the 20th century. The general principles and moral code adopted in our youth is directly parallel to the quality of craftsmanship that goes into building a seaworthy ship. A good ship will weather rough waters and come out intact after each storm passes. If the foundation is shoddy and the materials cheap, then the boat will most certainly fail when challenged by the sea. Civilization is in a precarious position. It is like a ship floating in a vast blue ocean, pitching left and right under a constant and incessant storm. The people at the wheel are guided by a false morality, and spend most of their time running around plugging holes and putting out fires. They don't learn from past mistakes because they are not actually trying to fix anything. They are parasites that feed on the blood of conflict in order to thrive. The worst part about it is that they have successfully convinced the general population that leaks in the boat are an unavoidable reality of existence. And they are leaks that spew blood, not water. And with every one of these leaks grows the collective seething vile hatred toward the world that mankind created. When horror and anger becomes commonplace, the wreckage of civilization becomes imminent. I want to build a better boat, this time made of the real thing, objective universal principles, which are binding on everybody. Now you can join me, or you can just stick your head in the sand and wait for the inevitable.